in the United States, how I've said before, where we have run into the issues where we have really only had one synthetic chemical anyways at a time. And in fact, we've had very few opportunities for to diversify and rotate chemical treatments because we just haven't really had much of an ability to do so. And when varroa hit our shores in 1988, there was really only one product registered for us to use at the time. It was Apistan. The active ingredient is fluvalinate, and everybody's using it. And in about 7 years or so, at first it worked great. In fact, if you look at like some old articles in the ABJ, American Bee Journal, the Apistan would have like an advertisement page for it, and it would say 100% guarantee or your money back, right? That doesn't exist. That won't exist anymore ever. No, they're not ever going to do that for a bee treatment. And so within a few years, right, it disappeared. People largely stopped using it because of resistance issues. And so then another product that came out was called Checkmate Plus, which, by the way, is a fantastic trade name. I mean, whoever came up with Checkmate, like A+, that was great. But the product itself was not a particularly good product. So, within just a couple of years of it rolling out, there was already lots of reports of resistance. The active ingredient there is Coumaphos, and I was actually relieved and happy that on the list of registered products in Australia that's not one of them. It's just not a good product. All right. Lastly, and I've said this, we've been using Amitraz, the active ingredient that is found in Apivar, for a long time. And we were using Amitraz long before we even had Apivar as a product accessible to us. And so the bees have been exposed to it for decades in the United States, and now we're really starting to see issues with it. So that's a little bit of a history of like where we're at, right? Like Apistan's largely, most beekeepers are not using in the US. Checkmate, most beekeepers are not using it. Apivar, people are starting to use it, or they've been still using it, but you kind of have to be careful. There are some issues with resistance. But while as beekeepers, we have a feeling of desperation, we're waiting for something, more to happen. We really need to fine tune how we're using the tools that we currently have so we can make the most of it. And what we see as I talk to people all throughout the United States is that, something that works really well for a beekeeper in Florida is not necessarily what's going to work really well for a beekeeper in California, or even, the regions can be quite close together, and we get differing opinions. And part of that reason is because of the way that varroa populations grow and the differences that we'll see in our mites just around these areas. So I know this is a figure, just a simple varroa population. It's definitely oversimplified, but it can kind of help start to give you a little bit of information of kind of why these might be different by season and by region. So if we follow this blue line, quickly you know that just like in a normal situation when your colonies are in dormant phase, your honeybee populations are not rearing a lot of brood, but as we kind of get into that spring season, our populations are growing, and so usually for us, around early summer, we're reaching our peak population, but by late summer and into the autumn, like our populations are declining, right? But our varroa, since varroa can only reproduce in honeybee brood cells, right? Their population is closely tied to the bee population. So notice how their population continues to grow, and then really when it becomes a major issue for us is in that period, kind of late summer and autumn, when we have a kind of a really imbalance where there's still enough brood for the varroa to continue to reproduce, but now we've just got really high numbers, and that's when our virus loads get really high and our colonies get sick and start to collapse. So I wanted to start off with sharing you with a little bit of research that I've kind of alluded to a couple times in my talk already, where we really just wanted to watch and observe varroa population growth in our apiaries in north central Florida. And what we did here, this was actually one of the more expensive projects that we've run because it was really costly, because what we were trying to do is to just see how long it takes for varroa to watch that varroa population growth, and then when do our colonies start to die, right? Like at what level do they just start falling apart? But what we wanted to really explore this was kind of like by season. And so the way that we did set up this studies is we would take 20 colonies in a location, and we would just treat the willies out of them, right? Like we would put in Apivar, we would hit them with OA vapor. We were doing all these things like all at the same time, just doing everything we could to get them as close to zero as possible. And then we would just step back and just watch. And we would go back and sample every month, use alcohol washes to watch what would happen to those varroa populations. And we would manage them accordingly. We have big problems with small hive beetles where we're at, so we had traps in there, and we would be feeding when we needed to feed, but we weren't doing any kind of varroa control, and we weren't propping colonies up by moving frames of brood around. So we did this for every season, and we did it for 2 years. So there actually was about 160 colonies total represented over 2 years. And so if we take those data and smash them together, this is what we see by season. So I'm going to walk you through these lines and what we observed. So let's start at the bottom, and that pink line down there, which was our spring season. So in the spring, when we treated like crazy, got them down as close to zero as possible, and then just watch what happens. It takes about 4-5 months. Now we're reaching that red dotted line right there is our 3 mites per 100 bee level. So when we're treating in the spring, it's taking us about 5 months before those mites kind of return back to that 3 mites per 100 bee level. When we do this in the winter, that's that blue line now, the dark blue line. See how it grows? It takes the same about like 4.5 months or so before we're reaching that 3 mites per 100 bees. So that's good information to have, right? Like in the spring and in the winter, when you're bringing those mite populations low, it takes a while for your varroa populations to return. Now, I know this is going to be different for you, right? Again, because as you're in this phase where you've got so much feral colonies around that are going to be reinfesting, it could look a bit different. We also have lots of feral colonies in Florida, but not nearly as much as you. So it could look a little different. But look at this, our summer line, that's that yellow. About 2.5 months or so is we're right back there. Same with in the fall. Right back 2 months, bam, they're right back to that same level. Notice though, they're all starting at the same. They are all starting as close to zero, but it just takes that just amount of time. Now, that summer and the fall, the reason they're probably shooting back up so fast for us is because of reinfestation, most likely. I mean, because there's still enough in the environment that's just bringing those mites quickly back, and they're developing really quickly. So this is good to know. Now, I had to cut this figure off. It's not showing the whole picture, but no, let's follow this summer line, that yellow line. See how those mite populations kind of reached close to about 9, 10, and then they started dropping off. Most of them, if we were to extend this out a little bit further, most of them would start to collapse around 11 to 12 mites per 100 bees is when they started really dropping off and dying. Now, I'll show you this next figure where we'll talk a little bit more about what we saw in terms of colony mortality. So that title on the top of the slide there is very bleak, right? But is very much been our experience in Florida, right? If you don't do anything, they're going to die, right? Like it's kind of really that simple. We can talk about survivor stock and stuff like that, and maybe some of those bees might survive, but if you don't do anything, they're not going to survive. Now that's different than selectively breeding, right? As Peter has been telling us and talking about, like that's different. That means you're doing something. You're driving towards mite control, but if you're not doing anything, it's not going to work out well for you. Now, whereas the slide before, I was combining 2 years worth of data into one, it was actually quite different from year 1 to year 2. So in this case, I'm splitting them up. So year 1 in our winter groups, they lived for about an average of 12 months, so about 1 year, and then afterwards, most of them had died. In the spring, about 10 months, and in the summer, only about 8 and in the fall about 9, right? So really, like within less than a year, most of them had died in year 1. Now year 2, it was even worse. Year 2, our winter group only survived about 8 months. Same with the spring and the summer and the fall were a little bit different, but still all within less than 1 year. So that's painting a kind of a bleak picture for you. And I apologize for doing that, but it's necessary to kind of helps you understand and to set up this next little bit of the experiment. But really what I've been talking about and spending a little bit of time sharing is really what I feel is one of the most important takeaways. If you learn anything from me in this time that I've been here is what I feel is really important is just monitoring, really knowing where your mite colonies are at, or your mite populations are at within your honeybee colonies. And this is so essential because you really should be making your treatment plans kind of based on where those mite populations are. And I've said this before, is I strongly feel that the alcohol wash is by far the superior method of just getting an idea of where your mite population or your mite infestation levels are at. Mite fall can work as a method of just detection, but not really good at monitoring. Like I've seen really high infested colonies that don't always have a lot showing up on the bottom, so it's not as very reliable. Same with drone uncapping, great for detection if you're in that phase of it, good. Keep doing that, keep looking for it. But once you have it and you are in the management phase of it, really should be looking at alcohol washes. Okay, so this next study that I'm going to show you is we've kind of recently published it. This article I'm showing you is about the integrated pest management. And I showed you this already if you wanted to check it out, where we kind of synthesized a lot of the research about it. But I put this on there one more time to remind you that I'm going to share with you this experiment where we were testing 8 different chemical treatments. But just so you know, chemical treatments are not the only answer, right? Just if you think through those IPM pyramids that we've been talking about, those are really important steps ahead of that. I believe that the cultural controls of selective breeding are going to be essential. There are good mechanical controls that can help, and these should become part of your routine and your maintenance. So part of the impetus for doing this research was because as we talked to beekeepers across the states, and we were hearing such wildly different reports of what works and what doesn't, and we go to meetings and somebody would come up and say like how great Apivar is working for them, and then other people are like, no, it's not going to work at all for you. Like it doesn't work at all for us, right? And so then we kind of were trying to get more at the bottom of this, and trying to see how seasonal impact could influence that. So I'm not going to give you an exhaustive list of chemical treatments or anything like that. I'm just going to tell you the treatments that we did and we tested. And we'll start off, we tested 4 organic treatments and 4 synthetic chemical treatments. And the ones that we included in this study were Apiguard, so the active ingredient there is thymol. And then we had a formic acid treatment. The treatment that we used was a product called Mite Away Quick Strips. We just call it MAX for short, MAQS, MAX. And it's actually, we did this experiment about 3 years ago, and we don't really see MAX is not a very common product anymore. Formic Pro has really kind of taken the lead on that. And frankly, Formic Pro is a better product. Anyways, but during this time we had used MAX, and we used 2 oxalic acid treatments, where we had the dribble, which is at about that 3% level. That was according to the Apibioxyl label. And then we did that OA shop towels method. So I had already kind of alluded to this yesterday if you were here for my talk, when I told you that we had tested this as one of Randy Oliver's recipes and had used it, soaked it in shop towels and used it. Now, let me give you a little background as to why we did that, because that was not on my original list of testing. I wanted to do OA vapor because I think OA vapor works very well, and so that was on my list to do it. But when we did this experiment, we wanted to use hundreds of colonies to be able to do this, and I can't manage hundreds of colonies. I will never get anything done with my other teaching responsibilities and other work that I've got to do. So we partnered with a commercial beekeeper, and the commercial beekeeper was very generous and gracious and gave us a bunch of colonies to work with, but he had a few caveats, or like a few little notes that he wanted to make sure that I knew. He's like, I will never use OA vapor in his apiary, is what he said. So he's like, so I don't want you to test Randy's shop towel method. I'm like, yeah, okay, fine. Okay, so I gave in there when we did that. So those were our four, organic chemical treatments, and then we had our 4 synthetic treatments. And then we only have 3 registered synthetic treatments in the U.S., Apistan, Checkmite, and Apivar. So we tested those 3. And then, as I mentioned before, beekeepers in the U.S. for decades have been kind of concocting their own amitraz treatments, where they're finding amitraz out of like bovine health treatments, and that has the same active ingredient, and they kind of mix it up with oil and soak it in shop towels and put them on. And so those were, and every commercial beekeeper, probably almost every beekeeper in the United States have used this at some time or another. So we wanted to test that, and it was easy to find a formula that a lot of beekeepers use. So these are the 8 treatments that we used. Notice that, again, just a reminder, that 2 of them were off-label. So one of them that I'm calling Bovitraz from here on out, Bovitraz was the treatment that's meant for cattle ticks, right? So it actually has about twice the amount of amitraz that like an Apivar strip has. And then the other one, number 8, there was the oxalic acid shop towel method, and I actually, off the top of my head, I can't tell you how much. I think it was about 30% oxalic acid. So those are our treatments here. And so the way that we set this experiment up was we wanted to have, by season, we wanted to have at least about 10 to 16 colonies for each treatment per season. And we were doing this all in one big apiary that we have that's close to our airport in Gainesville, so it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. This is another thing that you just have to know about beekeeping in the U.S., especially in the southeast. It's all just pines and oaks, which don't produce any like nectar, and so we do have to end up feeding a lot. And so the truth is where the University of Florida is a really terrible place to keep bees. So if we wanted to actually like produce any honey or anything, you'd have to get out closer to the coast or to be chasing any of those flows. But where we're at is a nice place to do this research because it's all in one location. But it did require us to do a little bit more management there. But we could take these clumps of colonies. We didn't want to have all of the treatments right next to each other in case there's some drifting and you might be like spreading mites around. But we didn't want to have them in different locations either, or else because then you would be introducing them to a bunch of new variables and they would be on different floral resources and things. So we spread them out about 50 meters apart from each of the treatments. And then we treated everything according to the manufacturer's label. The only exceptions to that rule were the ones that were the off-labeled treatments, and those were the ones that we just kind of had talked with commercial beekeepers and found the recipes that they had used. The only other exception to that was that some of these treatments, like formic acid and thymol, have very specific temperature ranges, but kind of for completeness of data, we applied them at every season, even if it was a little too hot. And you can guess what happened a little bit, so I'll share you with that in a little bit. But we wanted to do that for kind of completeness of the study. And then kind of similar to what we did before, is once we applied that treatment, we were just, the only things we were doing were feeding, doing a little bit of small high beetle management, and then we were taking alcohol washes every month to kind of see what would happen to those mite populations. And we continued to keep these bees in those studies until they those mite levels returned to that 3 mite per 100 bees. The average for the whole treatment returned to 3 mites per 100 bees. And otherwise, we did our best to just kind of manage them well. So, okay, I'm going to start showing you some pictures here of some data. Don't freak out. You don't even whip out your cameras, because we're going to summarize this all at the end for you. But just to set this up so you know what's coming, here's what you should expect to see, right? If you have, what we're expecting is that you have your mite levels here, and we apply a treatment. We would expect the mite populations to drop for a period of time and then to come up. So it might be like, should be making this nice U shape is theoretically what we should expect. I'm only setting that up for you so you understand what you're about to see is definitely not that, right? Okay, so in autumn, right, when our mites are typically at their highest level and really high, some of these products worked well, and some of them, well, so none of them worked particularly well, but some of them worked worse than others. So for instance, your eyes might go straight over here to this, the yellow line, which is the Apistan product, right? For us in autumn, look what happens to those mite populations. They never really came down. They just went up, 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 and then we're just like, all right, well, we're done. You know, we're not bringing those mites down at all. Some of them went up and then down a little bit, and that's really more of a result of colonies just collapsing due to high mite population. So for instance, Apigard, Apivar even, the mites kind of come up and they come back down as colonies started collapsing. The only ones that have somewhat of a U shape here for us in autumn was the formic acid treatment. That's the max, that's that purple line. And then our off-labeled amitraz treatment also kind of brought it down a little bit. Now, we'll talk about that later, so don't get any the wrong impression that I'm suggesting any of this. But those are the only ones that worked out. So this is kind of a bleak picture already. For autumn, there's not a lot of great options that were working for us when we had such high mite levels, right? Now, the winter actually performed like we expected it to perform. You start to see that U shape. And really, all of these treatments at some point at least brought these mite levels down for a little bit before they came back up. And the ones that seemed to do the best were like the formic acid treatment and the Apivar treatment held them down for 3 months before they came back up. The off-label amitraz treatment did the same. Even dumb old check mite, which I hate with a passion, even did a little bit, right? Like held it down for a couple months before it came. So the winter was actually a nice time to treat. Now this makes sense, right? It's not just organic acids that benefit from having broodless colonies. I mean, other synthetic chemicals, the same concept, right? If there's little brood inside the nest, then there's nowhere for these mites to hide, and then they're accessible, right? Accessible to treatments, and so we expect to see more mites drop during these periods. Spring was kind of more of a mixed bag. Some of them did work to some degree. Apigard, our thymol-based treatment, formic acid, I'm going to explain that one in a minute, also came down and dropped those for a little while. The OA dribble treatment, it took about a month before it really dropped it down low, but then it held it low for a few treatments. And so everything kind of worked except for Apistan and Apivar even, which was surprising for us. Apivar is, again, kind of still considered to be pretty much the gold standard in the United States, but even still, it didn't really take our mite populations even below that threshold. Now, I want you to look at the scale here of what I'm talking about. And this is kind of on us, but it's just, you'll appreciate this soon enough, I guess. It's tricky to bring those mite populations to a low amount. If you're looking at the scale, most of these are starting off around 7 or 8 mites per 100 bees, which is already too high, right? And so it's pretty hard to bring them down. Now, I've got to tell you that Mite Away Quick Strips one, or the formic acid, the purple one, notice that where that one is starting at 20 mites per 100 bee. Are you kidding me? It's ridiculous. It's super, super high, but that's, I tell you, that was mostly just one colony that just was outrageously high, and that's part of the reason that one started off so high. Once that colony had collapsed soon after, then it kind of evened things out a little bit. So it was a little bit of an outlier, but that's kind of why that dragged that number up so much. But for the most part, the spring, we do see some efficacy here. And then the summer, we see that U shape in a lot of them, but it's really more of a V at this point. It's like 1 month after treatment, it brings the populations down. But then 1 month later, they're just right back up, which is, again, what we would expect in the summer when we have a decent amount of varroa populations in our environment. We're getting a lot more probably reinfestation very soon after, and we're not fully dropping those mites to a level where they're not going to keep reproducing inside of the hive. So in the summer, the formic acid treatment brought them low, but I will tell you it also did quite a bit of damage. Formic acid is not intended to be applied during that time. So it burned up some bees, but the bees that survived came out squeaky clean. But that's not what you're supposed to be doing. And then the Apiguard, same thing with the thiamol treatment. It was pretty intense, brought them low, but there was a decent amount of colony mortality at that point. So none of these treatments in the summer really held them down for longer than a month, other than the ones that weren't supposed to be applied during that time. So one of the simple ways to kind of bring this together is to kind of think, because it's a little bit hard to think through, just those spikes, that we're looking at. Kind of a simpler way to think about this is to think about the percent of varroa, the change that we see in the percentage of varroa over 2 months. That's kind of a standard way of looking at it, is 2 months after treatment, where do we expect to see these treatments? And the way that my brain works, so you're getting a little peek into my madness, the way that my brain works is something what I would consider like a good idea, bad idea situation. Now, this may be, I don't know what the status of this cartoon is in Australia, but when I was a kid, there was a cartoon called Animaniacs. Anybody? No? Yeah, maybe a couple. Okay, so Animaniacs was a great cartoon. And they had these 10-second filler jokes that they called good idea, bad idea. And so for instance, a good idea was tossing a penny into a fountain to make a wish. A bad idea was tossing your cousin Penny into the fountain to make a wish. Or a good idea was buying a pair of shoes on sale. A bad idea was buying a parachute on sale, right? There was just these stupid little jokes that I remembered for my whole life. And but this is where my brain went, was good idea, bad idea of how we could think about this. So I'll show you kind of each season, and at the end it'll be all of them, and that's when you can take your pictures if you're going to. Because I know some of you want to take the pictures. I'm just saving you a little bit of space in your memory. So just wait for a second, and I'll get through all of them. Okay, so let's start with this. So good idea in autumn. The ones that were good at, I also need to quickly make a quick caveat, is that some of these I've put on the good idea list, even though I don't really think they're a good idea. For instance, these two. Bovatraz, which was our off-label amatraz treatment, and formic acid treatment, both of them were the only ones in autumn to maintain, 2 months after treatment, to maintain mites at a lower population. But the reason I'd say that's not good is, one, the Bovatraz treatment is off-label, and I don't think we should be using it anyways, and because using more amatraz when you already have amatraz resistance, like for us, we're just exacerbating the problem. So it's not a good option. The formic acid treatment, it did bring it down, but it was also, for us, it was still a little too warm. Now this is where it could be very kind of dependent on your location and your climate. For us, we say autumn, but it's only an autumn in calendar, really. We don't really have it. We only have summer and really intense summer. No, that's not true. We do get 1 week of winter, and it's glorious, and everybody freezes, and it kills all of our guava trees and stuff like that, but it's great for a really cold snap. And so for us, even in autumn, formic acid treatment was a little too warm and so that's why it did kind of knock back those colonies. That's why I've kind of labeled that in an orange color. But everything else was kind of just a bad idea. Notice our OA shop towel method, it grew by 883%, right? It didn't slow it down at all. It somehow made them better for the mites. And same with the OA dribble also, it was really bad. Checkmate was over 1,000% growth in 2 months. So like it just somehow skyrockets. I mean, those mites just grew. It's not slowing them down at all. In the winter, we have a few more things on our good idea list. So this is good. This is one, actually, I feel like more beekeepers really need to take advantage of the winter season when your colonies are of very little brood. That really needs to be part of your future plans as a beekeeper to take advantage of those times. Because just about everything, the playbook's wide open, right? That just about everything that we had access to in the U.S. was useful for us. With OA dribble, formic acid, Apiguard really kind of topping that list of being really nice products for us to use, or treatments to use in the winter. The only things that didn't really work for us was the OA shop towel and a checkmate product. In the spring, we're kind of now starting to get split half and half, where Apiguard and our off-label treatment and formic acid treatments worked incredibly well, but OA dribble was also effective as well. So the spring was a really good time. Now think back to that first figure that I ever showed you at the beginning of this talk when we were watching the varroa populations grow, right? The spring gave us the most bang for the buck too, right? When we applied at that time of the year, we had a long coverage, like about 5 months before our mite populations kind of returned back to that level. So utilizing the spring and the winter season for your varroa treatment is going to be essential, because then when you get into the summer and in autumn, you're really not being very successful. So notice here, oh yeah, this is the time when you can take a picture. It's all here. So Apiguard, the thymol treatment and the formic acid treatment, they were both just too intense in the summer. They're not intended to be applied at temperatures that are kind of outside of that normal range. But even our off-label treatment of amitraz, that is like really high amitraz amounts that a lot of commercial beekeepers are doing, that's still not giving them hardly anything. 15% after 2 months means it's just basically holding it steady, but it's not doing much more than that. So really, do we get our we've got 3 seconds before I'm switching. Okay, so really kind of the takeaways that I want you to think about here is that most of these treatments, can provide you a bit of time in the winter and the spring, and as like we saw, that's when we're getting our best bang for the buck. If you can get them close to zero, you can have potentially a few months before those mite populations are going to return. But when we get into the summer and into autumn, you're really in a hard place at that point. So if you let your mite populations really creep up and get high, there's very few options for you to bring them back down again. And it's at that point, you're just trying to maintain colony health in ways to support the high mite population, but that's not going to go great for you long term, right? You want to kind of get them low and keep them low. When we did this, our off-labeled amitraz treatment and our formic acid treatments were the only ones that worked every season, but I already told you they had two big issues with them. One, it's Bovatrav's is off-label, but it's also more amitraz, and if you're going to run into issues with resistance, it's if you're just continually throwing the same thing at it at an even higher dose. And then the formic acid works, but it was so harsh on our bees during the hot, the hot times of the year that it's not really a true viable option. And then, for us, where we have been using Apivar or amitraz for such a long time, that we are running into issues with amitraz resistance. And so that's something that we need to be very conscious about, and something that, as you guys get into this, and if, from what I'm hearing, and I'm talking to people at this meeting, and I'm hearing so many people talk about Beverol as the thing that everybody's kind of leaning on. You're going to run into issues with resistance if we're not starting to be careful about that, and you don't want to lose that, because if you lose Beverol, you've also probably effectively lost Apistan too. Right, so because those active ingredients are very similar. So this is the article. If you want to go check out and see in full or detail of the study that I just kind of explained to you, I invite you to do that. And you can also feel free to shoot me an email if you have questions. So I just want to take a second while you're snapping some photos of that. I want to tell you, like, let's think about how we can really apply what we've learned. Because again, I started off at this of this talk telling you that it is a bit different. Obviously our systems and our climates are different from Florida into where we're at now. And so the main takeaways that you ought to be thinking about is that regular monitoring is going to be essential for you to help you make these decisions. And if nothing else, you should be looking for treatment efficacy. That's, again, the biggest pushback I get is like, Cameron, if I already know I'm going to treat, why would I spend the time doing it? It's because you don't know, just because you spent a lot of money on a treatment doesn't necessarily mean it worked until you go in and you're checking, right? So before and after are really important. Continue to rotate those treatments, and then as Madeline brought up last night, is maintaining detailed records is just got to be part of your new new existence here with Varroa, because as I said, this is not rocket science. This is just us treating and sampling, and that's it. That's like what all this is, but you can figure out and work together with your local organizations and compare notes, right, of what works, what doesn't, and figure out a good treatment regimen. So I'm just going to wrap up. I'm going to go quickly because I know I'm about out of time, but if you do this together as groups, then you can really help each other out and fine-tune things that work for you in your area. And what I'd love to do, this is going to take people that are much smarter than me, but I'd love to collaborate with people that have that kind of big data skills to figure out, ultimately I'm visioning some kind of like app or something that you can put your numbers in and figure out like what treatments are appropriate for which season and how long you could expect some coverage based on what your current mite populations are. And I think that's all just could be beekeeper fed. So if you're collecting some good data, it's something that could go into future models and really help out. So, okay, I'm just gonna end it one more time, just say thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I've really appreciated all your hospitality and kindness, and hopefully there's good exchange that's happening. So if you have future questions and things, I'm happy to try to help you as you're kind of exploring this new reality. So with that, I'll say thanks.